Hi, my name is Brandon. I'm a really big Beatles fan, and for a long time I've really enjoyed the Beatles-related channels on YouTube, and I've always wanted to do something like that myself. So I thought I would talk a little bit about Beatles history, which is a big interest of mine. The period I'd like to talk about is when the Beatles went to Hamburg, Germany for a few months long before they were famous. This was at a period when they were grateful for every engagement they got. They had kind of an informal manager at this time named Alan Williams, who was a club owner in Liverpool, and he sort of represented their interests. And so he met a German club owner named Bruno Koschmider. And Koschmider wanted to have the Beatles come and play for him in a club of his in Hamburg. So one day in August 1960, Williams drove the Beatles to Hamburg, and they arrived very early in the morning. In fact, the club was still closed. However, a key was eventually obtained and the Beatles were let in, and they went to sleep on some chairs there. And eventually they were shown their actual quarters, which were very modest. Koschmider had them sleeping in a storeroom in a nearby movie theater called the Bambino. And the club they were in was called the Indra. And I should probably say something about the area this was in. They were on a street called Grosse Freiheit, and I apologize for if I pronounced the German name wrong, but there was a nearby very prominent street called the Reeperbahn, and it had lots of neon lights and restaurants and all sorts of interesting things to see and do, and gangsters and sex shops and things like that. And it was a real eye-opener for these teenagers who had never seen anything like it. And they were given a very difficult, long schedule. They had to play for hours every day. And a lot of people think that playing such long hours day after day perfected their raw talent. They just had to, grind out song after song and expand their repertoire of songs. And so they played at the Indra for not quite 2 months, and then it was closed. What happened was that there was an elderly widow living in the same building, and she had made numerous noise complaints. And finally the authorities stepped in and do something. Koschmider closed the club and moved the Beatles to another club of his called the Kaiser Keller. The Kaiser Keller was somewhat bigger and was very busy. In fact, it needed a whole army of bouncers for the rough clientele. The bouncers were under the direction of a bouncer named Horst Fascher. Apparently he had been a boxer until he accidentally killed someone in a street fight. And he liked the Beatles, and he looked out for them, and he told them, if you have a problem, you come to Horst. So the Kaiser Keller was where the Beatles were playing when they met three German kids about their own age who became lifelong friends. What happened was one night this young German guy, Klaus Vormann, an artist, had had a fight with his then-girlfriend, Astrid Kircher, and he was wandering around that area, and he heard the music and went in, and he had never heard rock and roll before, and with the great music and the interesting show in the Beatles' personalities, he was really overwhelmed by it, and he went back to Astrid and said, "You have to come and see this for yourself." And so the next night she did. Klaus, Astrid, and one other friend of theirs named Jürgen Vollmer went and caught their act, and they all had the same reaction. And I guess it was after the show or between sets or something, Klaus went up and introduced himself to John and tried to show him some of his art. And John said, "You should show Stuart, he's the artist in the group," which reminds me that I should probably say something about the makeup of the Beatles at this point. The Beatles were not the Beatles such as we know them. They had John and Paul and George. The drummer was Pete Best from Liverpool, and a school friend of John's from Liverpool, Stuart Sutcliffe, was playing bass. And Stuart started going out with Astrid and became engaged to her, and eventually would drop out of the Beatles to marry her and stay in Germany. And what finally happened to end the Beatles' first time in Hamburg was that there was a bigger and better club in the area called the Top Ten Club, run by a man named Peter Eckhorn, and they wanted to play there because it was bigger and better, and Eckhorn wanted them to play there, but they had this contract with Bruno Kaschmider. So what happened was that they just broke the contract. They stopped playing at the Kaiserkeller and started playing at the Top Ten Club. And this made Kaschmider very angry, and he took revenge. He knew a secret about the Beatles, and the secret was that George was underage, and therefore when he played at night he was in violation of a curfew. There was a curfew which gave the latest time that performers below a certain age could perform. So Kaschmider turned George into the police, and they came and arrested him and deported him back to England. And what happened next was that Paul and Pete went back to gather their belongings to the Bambikino, and what they did was somewhere between a practical joke and, getting revenge. They they nailed a condom to the wall and set it on fire. And I don't think there was really any danger. It was all cement, but Kaschmider then turned Paul and Pete into the police, who arrested them and deported them back to England too, which left John in the unusual position of being the only one who wasn't in trouble. But there was really nothing he could do there, so he returned to England. And by all accounts, the Beatles that returned to England were not the same Beatles who had left. They had become much more skillful musicians, and that was the end of their first period in Hamburg, although they would eventually go back. So I hope you found this interesting, and thank you very much for watching.